welcome everyone. I see we have two guests here so far, hopefully more come. I'm Jessica Winegar. I'm a professor of anthropology and chair of the Middle East Studies Department at Northwestern University and a big supporter of the MESA Global Academy. So really happy to have you scholars with us today. Wait, let me toggle to my introduction. So for those of you who are coming in and maybe less familiar with the Global Academy, I just want to explain that it's an interdisciplinary initiative that sustains essential research collaborations and knowledge productions among scholars in the MENA region and their counterparts outside the region. And it supports displaced scholars in the humanities and social sciences. And so we are very lucky to have scholars with us today from Afghanistan, Syria, Turkey, and Yemen, who will all be presenting papers generally in the theme of conflict, power, and knowledge, studies from the Middle East and diaspora. I'm going to put a link to donate to the MESA Global Academy in the chat, and hopefully it'll stay there. I'll keep refreshing it as the time goes on. But why don't we start here with our very first speaker, Adel Dashela. Adel is a Yemeni researcher with a master's in English literature from the English and Foreign Languages University in India, and has a PhD from Bammu University from 2018. He's been awarded a Yemeni Ministry of Higher Education Scholarship and the Jawaharlal Nehru Memorial Fund Scholarship. He's lectured in Istanbul and served as the director of the Abad Strategic Forum. And he's published numerous papers in Arabic and English, and now he is a non-resident fellow at the Columbia Global Centers in Amman. So the title of his paper is The Role of Yemeni Tribes in Mediation, National Reconciliation, and Post-Conflict Peacebuilding. What a great topic. Take it away, Adel. Yes, go ahead. We can hear you.
Yes, I'm trying to share. Is it okay right now?
Yes, it's in the author view, which is fine, but you can put slideshow view on and then we can see the full screen.
Could I start right now?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. My research paper is trying to explain the role of Yemeni tribes in mediation, national reconciliation, and post-conflict peacebuilding. As you know, Yemen is a traditional country and most of populations are tribes. So in this research paper, I would like to explore the critical role of Yemeni tribes in local mediation, national reconciliation, and post-conflict peace-building efforts, emphasizing their historical significance in resolving conflicts through the traditional practices. The study will highlight the necessity of integrating tribal mediation to enhance peace building and address the root of the problems or conflict in Yemen. So the research problem that, as I mentioned before, we Yemenis most are tribes. So Yemeni tribal customs prioritize conflict resolution through dialogue and consensus, which are essential elements. Unfortunately, right now, tribes are removed to play an important role because of the conflict. So in this study, I think that it's very important to address these gaps by examining the role of Yemeni tribes in mediation, national reconciliation, and post-conflict peace building. Tribal mediation has proven effective in resolving political conflicts in Yemen, and this form of mediation is rooted in our local culture. The objectives of this study is to analyze the tribal mediation practices and also to evaluate tribes' contributions to national reconciliation and also to identify the challenges tribes face in their mediation rules and explore opportunities for enhancing their effectiveness in peace building, and to describe or to analyze the documents of tribal law and how these tribes have played an important role in resolving the previous conflicts. And the questions, what are the rule or what role do Yemeni tribes play in local mediation and national reconciliation efforts? And how have tribal traditions, practices influenced post-conflict peace building in Yemen? What are the challenges and opportunities that Yemenis tribes face in their mediation efforts? And how can their integration into international mediation enhance their effectiveness in promoting peace? I will try to use like descriptive analysis in this research paper, and also I will try to make interviews with some tribal leaders and to explain their experiences in this field. In my point of view, this is a very important study because it is trying to understand the tribal dynamics or rules in resolving the conflict. It also explores the effectiveness of various tribal mediation strategies in addressing political and social conflicts in Yemen. So theories that will be used, I think, because as you know, we have a long way of international mediation to resolve the conflict. And now we have around 4 UN's envoys to Yemen. Unfortunately, all of them have failed and they couldn't achieve peace and stability to Yemen. So trust of tribal mediation, because tribal leaders often operate within a framework of trust and mutual obligations, which can enhance their effectiveness as mediation. Also, in Yemen, these tribes have played important role during this conflict, and I think that it is very important today to address their abilities of achieving a real peace or a lasting peace and stability in Yemen. Historically, tribes, as I mentioned before, played an important role during the previous conflicts in 1963, in 1965, in 1970, and also in 2010 between Houthis and the Yemeni government. So they have achieved a lot of agreements between conflicting parties or between armed groups and the Yemeni state or government. Just you can look at this picture, tribal leaders with President of Egypt in 1960 during the conflicts or before the conflict between Imamate and new regime support, which was supported by President of Egypt or the regime of Egypt at that time led by Abdel Nasser. Nowadays, if we just try to focus on tribal mediation, we will find that tribal mediation has succeeded in mediating many issues during the current conflict. For example, maintaining security in tribal areas, concluding agreements between the Houthis and some tribal leaders or some tribes in the northern part of Yemen, also opening roads between governorates, also facilitating the exchange of prisoners of war between the Houthi groups and the Yemeni government, also mediating the exchange of dead bodies between the parties to the conflict. And all these issues, United Nations couldn't achieve or succeeded in these issues. However, tribes have made a strong outcome for their mediation. Just you can look how tribes are trying to resolve the conflicts between tribes or between Houthis and tribes. These are some pictures of a tribal gathering to mediate local disputes. And also you can look at these tribal leaders who are trying to mediate and solve local conflicts. And tribal system has some characteristics, which are the Yemeni tribes are primarily organized around kinship ties and lineage. Collective identity and loyalty, traditional leadership, because each tribe has its tribal leader. Tribes often have their informal system to solve their own problems or their social, political, or any kind of problems. Honor and reputations, communal solidarity, traditional customs and practices, and etc. And also tribal mediation has some characteristics. For example, acceptance and consensus, ethical and social motivation, commitment to popular rules, and deep understanding of local conditions. And tribal leader must have a public interest in resolving the dispute if he wants to mediate between tribes or between armed groups and tribes or between the government and armed groups, and to have no direct relationship with the problem, and to be accepted by both parties to the conflict, and to have a good reputation and the ability to influence on the parties to the conflict, and to have patience and the ability to tolerate what may be issued by both parties, and to the ability to bear the consequences and costs of mediation, and to be familiar with tribal law. Now, limitations and challenges. We have some limitations and also we have challenges. Structural challenges, as you know, that internal and external divisions, also marginalization of tribes by conflicting parties, and also the conflict is very complicated today, and it is very difficult because we have non-state actors and many local actors, and we have regional actors, and also now we have maybe international actors. And also we have some functional challenges like limitations of the role of tribes, and also the shortcomings of international mediations that ignore the importance of local informal actors such as tribal rule. Finally, I think that it's very important to benefit from tribal customs and mediation and employ them to serve post-conflict peace building and stability in Yemen. And I think it is very important to appoint a local mediator alongside the UN envoy for Yemen, and enhancing international support for local tribal mediation, and also enhancing coordination between local tribes, local and international tribal mediation. I mean, it is very important today to discuss these issues and local actors such as tribal leaders must participate in mediation, and also to build local tribal capacities and enhancing local legitimacy for tribal mediation and expanding the scope of tribal mediation. Right now, all these issues must be discussed if we want to achieve a lasting peace in Yemen. During the last 10 years, we have seen an attempt by the United Nations to solve the conflict in Yemen. Unfortunately, all the UN's special envoys for Yemen have failed to achieve their duties or to help Yemenis to solve this conflict. They couldn't convince the non-state actors like Houthis, like Southern movements, and other local actors. Also, the regional powers, because we have a lot of regional powers who are supporting non-state actors inside Yemen. And all these actors, I mean local actors, couldn't achieve stability, peace, and security because they are trying to achieve their own interest and the regional powers' interests, which are supporting them. And today, I think that if we want to help Yemenis, we must look at these problems from the lens of Yemenis themselves, from the lens of tribes, from the lens of social actors and local actors. And then if we address the roots of the conflicts and we are trying to share thoughts and any kind of mediation with local actors, then maybe we can achieve some kind of political agreements or national reconciliations. Otherwise, if we just still wait for international community to support Yemenis, finally, we cannot see peace or stability. We will see more complicated conflicts, and I hope the end of this conflict will be ended soon. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dashela. I hope it ends soon, and this was a very, very convincing paper. Welcome to our new guest to the MESA Global Academy panel. Our next paper is by Dr. Begum Burak. Begum Burak is an independent political scientist whose research, teaching, and writing focus on democracy, media, human rights, online freedoms, artificial intelligence, Turkish politics, and critical discourse analysis. She earned her PhD in political science and international relations from Fatih University and her MA in public administration from Istanbul University. Before receiving this MESA Global Academy Fellowship, Dr. Burak served as a Turkey country expert for the VDEM Institute, which is a Swedish-based democracy research organization. She also served as a researcher for the Religion and State Project, initiated by Bar Ilan University. And she's currently serving as an editorial board member for the Scopus Index Journal of Applied Learning and Teaching, and is on the board of advisors for Learning Life, which is a Washington, D.C.-based nonprofit. And she also writes reports and op-eds for the Human Rights Research Center in Virginia. I'm very excited about this paper today because it kind of relates to my research as well. The paper of Dr. Burak is titled Political Interference in Academia, the Impact of Parachuting on Turkish Universities. Go ahead, Begum.
Thank you so much for introducing me and also for the opportunity. And I'm very happy to present my work here. This is not a completed work. It's in the preliminary stage. So I hope to also get feedback and comments. I hope to make it as a full paper in the upcoming months. So I want to share my screen. Okay. So can you see my screen?
Yes, now we can see it.
I can have some problems because of the systemic issues with my laptop, but I'm gonna try to stick to the time and also present as best as I can. So the topic of me, as you already noted, you've already noted, is titled, the topic I'm going to present is about political interference in Turkish academia, the impact of parachuting. So the term parachuting is relatively a new term, not much used in Turkish academic papers by Turkish scholars. I'm gonna try to give some context about where it's used. It has been used. First of all, as a brief introduction and overview of the study, of the research, I'm gonna summarize it as follows. Turkish higher education landscape has been undergoing a significant transformation marked by a growing trend of politically motivated appointments within academic institutions. And these kind of appointments have been on rise since the failed coup attempt, because the regime of rector appointments has changed. This practice, generally known as parachuting, the concept of parachuting normally has been used in South Korea context, also in some other contexts, but for political or corporate appointments, but also we can use this term in the academic context as well. This research investigates the consequences of parachuting on academic freedom, institutional autonomy, and the overall quality of higher education in Turkey by analyzing specific cases and policy shifts. I aim to shed light on the broader impact of political interference on the academic landscape. So I want to make a distinction between academic freedom and academic autonomy. We all know what they refer to. Academic freedom is the right of teachers and students to explore, teach, and study ideas and knowledge without undue interference or restrictions from external entities. It's essential for fostering an environment where intellectual inquiry can thrive. Academic autonomy can be defined as a degree of self-governance granted to academic institutions, allowing them to manage their own affairs in an independent way. We can say that the major impacts of political interference in Turkish academia have been seen in these two fields. The first is the academic freedom, the second is academic autonomy. The concept of parachuting, so what it is. In academia, parachuting refers to the appointment of individuals to key academic positions, such as university rectors or deans, without the usual vetting or approval from the academic community. The second part is important in terms of giving a more clear definition of the concept. The term parachute appointment is commonly used in literature to describe a specific type of appointments, especially prevalent in East Asia, notably the Republic of Korea, although it typically refers to the political appointments of individuals into public and private corporations. A similar pattern is dominant in Turkish academic context, while political intervention influences the process. I took this second part from a professor working in Boğaziçi University, I don't remember the name clearly at the moment, but these are the words of a paper, actually. Institutional consequences of parachuting. It erodes trust and morale within the institution, compromises academic autonomy, and can negatively impact the institution's reputation. So first, I want to give a brief overview of the structural and historical development of Turkish higher education sector. In 1773 is the date when first university was founded in the Ottoman Empire, lagging 800 years behind Europe in establishing higher education institutions. In early 90s, first Ottoman University was founded, later renamed as Istanbul University. It was renamed in 1933. In 1946, new law on universities comes into effect, leading into the establishment of new universities, including Ankara University and Istanbul Technical University. In 1980s, there was a military coup in September 1980, and after this coup, major changes in higher education happened, including the establishment of YÖK, or the Council of Higher Education of Turkey. This was established in 1981, and so structural reforms in Turkish higher education. There are some important developments. The establishment of YÖK. YÖK actually can be seen as a central organization. It's many people say that there's a so-called autonomy in Turkish universities, but normally YÖK regulates and directs many affairs of the institutions and of the universities. It was established after the coup attempt in 1980. Bologna process is another milestone in the higher education system of Turkey. In 2001, Turkish higher education institutions became part of the Bologna process, implementing reforms such as the European credit transfer system and the accreditation processes. Current status, as of 2023, Turkey has 208 universities, including private and public universities, and holds the largest higher education student population in the European higher education area, with nearly 8 million students. Also, in the current years, under the rule of AKP, many public and private universities have been established. But the public universities established in different parts of Anatolia or of the eastern part of Turkey, unfortunately, despite having the departments, some don't have students, some don't have enough professors, or most of them have been appointed based on nepotism, I can say. So this high number of universities quantitatively does not give, unfortunately, it doesn't give a good image for the qualitative quality of the higher education in Turkey. So I want to talk about the rector appointment process, because this actually constitutes the core of my study. As I said, it's in the preliminary stages, so it needs more insights to be added. Rector appointment process and evolution. Between 1992 and 2016, there was a three-stage system. Faculty members elected 6 candidates. YÖK, Turkish Higher Education Council, selected 3 of them, and the president appointed 1. So there was some degree of academic, I want to say merit-based maybe, appointments here, because faculty members should have some idea about the elected candidates. They have more idea about how kind of academics they are, more than the president, of course. Between 2016 and 2018, system changed after the failed coup attempt, with amendments based on the state of emergency degrees. Okay, it goes on actually here. Rectors appointed directly by the president have been appointed directly by the president since 2018, without YÖK's involvement in proposing candidates. Still, it goes on like that, but there's an important development that happened in June this year. Turkish Constitutional Court declared several provisions of Decree 803 unconstitutional, including the president's authority to appoint rectors. Yes, I'm sorry, I need to rectors. Yes, so there it is against, in fact, the Turkish constitution, the current system. In the beginning, I noted that I would talk about the policy issues, as I just did now, and also some case examples. I think the most remarkable example, as most of us know here, is the Boğaziçi University rectorate crisis that broke out in early 2021. Erdogan appointed Melih Bulu as rector of Boğaziçi University, and he was the first rector appointed from outside of the university's community, and there were mass protests after this appointment. Also, hundreds of arrests occurred both in academic field, also students protesting have been arrested. And then due to the continuous protests, both inside and outside Turkey, Bulu was removed by a presidential decree again by Erdogan, and another professor very close to the ruling party was appointed in August 2021. Again, this was, and the Naci İnce is the new rector of Boğaziçi University, and also under his management, many acting deans from outside the university have been appointed, and these have violated long-standing traditions in Boğaziçi University. And my final words is about, but first of all, before coming to my final words, finally, before saying my final words, I want to give some notes about a study carried out by Karadağ, and it was a 2021 dated paper. According to Karadağ's paper, I cannot recall the first name, sorry for that, but he's a Turkish professor. 29% of the rectors appointed have no citation on Scopus. 29% of the appointed rectors have no citation on Scopus. 36% of them have no citation in Web of Science. In Turkey, also many of the professors, as they don't know English very well, have Turkish papers, but it's not very hard to become professor in Turkey, actually. So my final words, I think I have like 5 minutes left. The impact of political interference on Turkish academia. We can summarize this under 4 sections. Declining rankings, it's parachuting or political intervention in the appointments in appointments in Turkish academia cause declining rankings both in qualitative and quantitative terms. The Turkish universities do not have a good record. Of course, there are some very good universities like Sabancı, maybe Middle East Technical University, but it could be better without such unskilled people ruling the universities in Turkey. The second result is the weakened academic freedom. The declining academic freedoms have been a major concern for both students and also for many academics who try to improve themselves always based on their merits. So weakened academic freedom has been a threat for many distinguished scholars in Turkey. Also, unplanned opening of departments leads to an increase in unemployment rates among graduates. So when the head of the university is not skilled or qualified or has no idea about, the region that the university has been constructed in, or the student profile, so they just like parachuting. In parachuting, we know that they just come from up above suddenly, and maybe they have no idea what is around them. So like in this case, due to their lack of knowledge, lack of information and practice of these politically motivated appointments, these kind of rectors cause unplanned opening of departments, which increased unemployment rates. And also social unrest is another impact. Controversial appointments spark protests and social tensions within academic communities. And these are my words for today, but I want to also summarize one small thing. I am sorry I couldn't put it in the PowerPoint, but I took some notes in a Word document. In my final minutes, I'm gonna try to mention these points. As a part of my abstract, I use the concept meritocracy. I think also meritocracy is another important point to mention here because political interference in academic appointments undermines meritocracy. Normally I can recommend the Elgin, yes, Ceyhun Elgin's article about this topic. Actually, I saw the term parachuting in his article first of all. He also uses parasailing. He coins such a term, but it didn't look very nice, parasailing. I think parachuting is better, but this is the research that I used as a reference point. And besides its impact on unemployment and also decline in academic freedoms and academic quality, it compromises academic autonomy. It also has a very negative impact on institutional reputation. Also, for example, in developed EU countries like Germany, it's very different from Turkey, the appointment of rectors. German universities primarily appoint their rectors through an election by the University Senate or Council. In most cases, the rector's role is a combination of academic and administrative leadership, and candidates are usually drawn from within the academic community. In the US, for example, the recruitment and appointment of university presidents or rectors vary widely depending on the institution, whether private or public. Generally, a governing board, such as Board of Trustees, is responsible for appointing the president. These boards often hire search firms to assist in identifying and evaluating candidates through a competitive nationwide search process. Japan, Republic of Korea, and Singapore has different characteristics, but South Korea, it is, as I said, this term actually has been taken from the South Korea practices, mostly about public and private institutions. So these are my words. I think I don't have any other words to say. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can
Good.
hear you. Thank you so much.
My computer just froze. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I'm very happy to share my work today with you. Thanks.
Thank you. I just need to say that the comparison with the US may not last because I actually think we're starting to see many of these practices in the United States now. And likely we'll see more, unfortunately. But thank you, Dr. Burak. Our next presenter is Basileus Zeno. Basileus is an assistant professor in the Department of Political Studies at Trent University in Canada. His work combines research, advocacy, and policy work on forced migration and asylum, legal violence, social movements, and interpretive decolonizing methodologies. Dr. Zeno received his PhD in political science from the University of Massachusetts Amherst in 2021, and he also holds a BA and MA in classical and Islamic archaeology from Damascus University. So he really shifted fields. He's the author of an academic book called The Empire's Mirror, The Coinage of Seleucid Kings in Syria. That's in Arabic. And his article on the sectarianization of the Syrian uprising has received numerous awards from international conferences, including MESA. And he also has a collaborative policy report called Lives in Limbo, How the Boston Asylum Office Fails Asylum Seekers. And that was awarded the 2022 Clinical Legal Education Association Award. He's here today to present to us a paper called Challenges of Knowledge Production in Diaspora, a Syrian Case Study. Welcome, Dr. Zeno.
Okay. Hi. Can you see my slides? The whole page or?
Yes, it looks great. Whole
Okay.
page.
Okay. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you, Jessica, for chairing the panel, and also thanks to my colleague for presenting such important topics as well. My research stems from which you already raised it, Jessica. I shifted from one thing to another thing, and that has a story. So currently, I'm working on the. I continue to build on my field work for my dissertation, but focusing on another project, which is basically building up on challenges of knowledge production in diaspora and the formation actually of diasporic community. Just to give you a background and the following the Arab Spring and the social movement that started in 2010, we started to see more numbers of displaced scholars coming from the region, and also that's also now expanding to other parts. But there have been increasing numbers of displaced scholars from the MENA region, Middle East and North Africa, who have come under sustained pressures and threats from their own governments. Which is not a new phenomena, but with the interest of actually analyzing causes of social movement is prohibitable to conduct in your own country to start with. So that said, only few scholars ended up relocating in Europe and North America academia through scholarships and grants. But they face structural challenges. Some of these structural challenges that we find temporary solutions for displaced scholars, as my colleague here in MESA Global Academy, rarely result in sustainable institutional solidarity in the form of permanent teaching or professional positions. Also, depending on your citizenship, we see discriminatory and racialized immigration policies. Unfortunately, that will become more relevant in the coming 4 years, as you will see it. The reason why I and my wife came to Canada and our kids is basically because of the impact of Trump policy on our life. So to start with. So that pushes even those who are few fortunate scholars who secured because of their merits, but because also of many other factors, landing on scholarship in North America, to either accept in the longer term exploitative conditions perpetuated by neoliberal economy, or leave academia altogether to support their families. That's a fact. That's what we all are going to face unless we have a transformative structural and institutional policy, which doesn't seem to happen anytime soon. In addition to that, we have, depending again on your citizenship, but if you are from Iran, from Afghanistan, from Syria, Yemen, Sudan, or you are Palestinians, you are more likely to face U.S. Treasury Department Office of Foreign Assets Control, which is OFAC sanctions that will prevent you from either opening a bank account or having a credit card, or actually keeping and maintaining your bank account. We had an American bank account for 12 years. After the implementation of severe sanctions under Trump, we lost our bank account even after 12 years. So that's just an example that even if you manage to have the first round, it's not necessary will continue. But we have institutional, now going to the academic part, institutional challenges that face displaced academics. First of all, like that's in the level of academia. We see dominant and dominating Eurocentric power structure that maintain and reproduce the coloniality for knowledge and scientific racism by several means. Some of them are basically restricting displaced scholars' mobility by inequalities in passport value. And if you are traveling, you are less sought asylum in the US. That means it's a prison for 10 years. You won't be able even to conduct your field work abroad because it's up to the officer actually to leave you enter the country again or not. Stealing their times and savings. That's a concept from ethnographer Shahram Khosravi, who argued that there is one of the key values that immigrants and racialized scholars face is stealing their own times. That comes into what we normalize as paperwork, fees, waiting for appointments, embassies, and visa concerns. The third factor is limiting their access to financial resources and grants. You will see if you apply for grants, like we should thank MESA Global Academy, but it's one of of the few resources that are available for thousands of displaced scholars, if not hundreds of thousands. We aren't eligible to apply for most scholarships, including Fulbright and many others that American scholars or even like scholars who have from the region but have citizenship are eligible to apply. So you are competing with very small pool, with even people who had sometimes the privilege of having a stable background, to say the least. The fourth factor is discrediting non-Western credentials and literature. Many of you are already established. Many of you were already scholars established in your country or professors. You found now that your credentials are not recognized. You have to start from scratch. You have to lose like tens of years of work that weren't seen at all in this status of academia. And finally, suppressing their embodied experience, such as you are stigmatized as biased, non-scientific, non-objective reflections, etc. And you will see that more if you are working on displacement and refugee studies, for instance. It's better. You are always the source of data, but you are incapable of analyzing the data. You give interviews, but you aren't the one who are capable as a scholar to conduct the interviews. As a background, I lost 10 years of my hard work. This is my book based on my dissertation, but I was fired from Damascus University in 2014. But I continued to work and develop this. It was reviewed, etc. I'm lucky to have published it like by the Arab Center for Research, and it's an academic book, but it's not recognized. That's my 10-year book. It's 600 pages. It's gone just, it's a closure for me, but it's not recognized by any status of academia. That would have been my 10-year track, my 10-year book, and in addition to my peer-reviewed article, but I'm just focusing on the book. The one in the picture is Khalid al-Assad, who was the director of antiquities in Palmyra, who was beheaded by ISIS and killed. This is me, the younger version of me, doing excavations in Palmyra, like in the early 2000s. So how to deal with that? I use, though it's unconventional in political science to use ethnography, it's changing though. I use insider ethnography as a form. So many of the ideas that I am sharing today have been luckily published with the support of MESA Global Academy and the International Journal of Middle Eastern Studies. It's open access. We reflect, my partner and I, many of the challenges what we faced as academic in the United States, and why we left for Canada. Also, the reports to the left is the report that I contributed to as a co-author with the ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union, where I conducted hundreds of interviews, but also we had unique access, for instance, to between 2014 2023 with asylum seekers, TPS holders, which mean temporary protection status holders, refugees, immigrations, attorneys, but also conducted ethnographic field work in Syria, Canada, and the United States. Of course, in Canada after leaving the United States because I wasn't eligible to travel. However, instead of disregarding my own experience of that, so I embedded this experience as and embraced my positionality as displaced scholar and former asylum seeker. So what are my research contribution? My contribution, I aim to recenter the experience of racialized scholars from the MENA region after displacement, which I argue would illustrate the coloniality of immigration and asylum system, and also the status of academia and how it's still and remain Eurocentric, even when it's engaged in decolonizing academia. And also another factor, how the war on terror has become a global system of racialized violence and necropolitics, both in Europe and North America, as well as in the so-called home country. And pay attention to the vote in the Senate today, because if that will expand the war on terror, which means like when Trump become a president, anytime they don't like an NGO, they will designate it as a terrorist organization, including encampment on campus, critique of Israel, etc., with the expansion of the EHRA definition. Another factor is that I contribute to the epistemic decolonization of migration studies, which I think it's problematic despite all the contribution. Therefore, I use interpretivist methodology. I'm happy to explain what does that mean, but for the sake of the time, I will skip it. But I will ask two big questions. What do we miss analytically, ethically, and empirically when we focus on state-centric approaches to power and politics instead of lived experience of ordinary people, including scholars? What are the effects of recentering global politics of race around decolonized knowledge production and intersectional analysis? So I will reflect quickly on the challenges, two key challenges that we face in the field, like in general. One of them is mistrust. If you are coming from a context that you was ruled by authoritarian regime for your whole life, you would notice that there is a level of mistrust. So if you are conducting interviews and you are from that context, not a second, third generation Syrian or Iraqi or Lebanese, you are more, sometimes you will get answers that are not completely honest. How would you know when a white scholar interviewed the same person would get more honest opinion than actually as a scholar? So there is a level of, you have to build long-term relationship with your participants and interlocutors in order to actually get into the gist of their argument or what they really believe. And we see it also with the way how even in it's not limited to authoritarian regime, but also in the United States, political scientists failed miserably in predicting the rise of Trump in 2017 because they relied on statistics. Their projection were utterly wrong because they didn't do ethnographic work, they didn't care, and people can lie actually in polling. They can say like, I'm going to vote for Hillary, and then they vote because they were afraid from their family and they felt intimidated, etc. There are many other factors. Also, identification and categorization participant. In the age of social media, you don't own your own identity anymore. You would be searched, especially if you like you schedule an interview. In many cases, you could face cancellation of the interview if the person Googled you and find basically things that they disagree with you like 10 years ago. Then you will say they will dodge you and they will say like, I'm busy, etc. So there are some of the challenges that didn't exist, let's say, in the traditional field work. Fear of retaliation, even in countries of displacement. So you would see what Lisa Woodin called politics of as if. Sometimes you will receive, that's relevant to the point number one, mistrust. Sometimes you receive answers as if the person is believing in what they are saying. And that's also due to the fear of retaliation. If you conduct an interview with asylum seekers, based on what I did in the US, in many cases, people were less likely and hesitant to be critical of the United States or Trump policy around that time. Because they thought like coming from their experience in Syria or Iraq or Yemen or Palestine, they feared that they will be searched and they will face denial of asylum based on that experience. The other factor also, coloniality of knowledge and hierarchical power, where actually we occupy different positionalities between the local, the privileged citizenship, the white scholar, which can produce and may produce internalized inferiority. Gatekeeping is another factor. Who is controlling the narrative? Sometimes like people do an interview, then you publish the work, then they would read your work and say, no, that's basically changing the dominant narrative. You would see this within two categories. In peer-reviewed article on the one hand, in the other hand, you will find it actually amongst participants who want to keep certain narratives. Let's say it's utterly a revolution that happened in Syria versus it's a conspiracy. Like these two Manichaeans understanding can actually affect the sustainability of research. Another factor is stolen time. As a scholar, you aren't just researching people in vulnerable and precarious situation. You are in a precarious situation yourself. You have to provide for your family, you have to deal with your bank account, you have to deal with sanctions, and you have to interview people basically who trigger secondary traumatic stress in many cases, especially if you escape torture or face retaliation. So that some of the shared stories can affect you directly and personally. So what are some of this is the conclusion, what are some of the opportunities by using decolonizing tools in the field? We can use, for instance, and what we advocate for, if you are a displaced scholar, to use and not shy away from using between our autoethnography, which we define building on diversity and Moreira, as a method of resistance that historically marginalized as a displaced scholar can use to destabilize your American norms and transgress the national order of things, building on Malki's work on ethnography and migration. So Because in our case, including you, my fellow panelists, we simultaneously inhabit both intense precarity, for instance, displaced Syrians without protective status as citizens or permanent residents, but also we occupy privilege, and we have to acknowledge that. Like many of our colleagues couldn't escape more severe conditions. So that relates to our academic standing as scholars in Global North. Therefore, we call for embracing more intersectional analysis and in displaced research, and be self-reflexive throughout the process, before entering the field, but also after completing your own work and the publication. And embrace ethics. It's easy to say, but actually it's very difficult to address. Using ethics as methodological approach, we had to kill many projects because it would have affect our families directly who remain in Syria. That doesn't mean we aren't capable. We already did interviews, we already did research, but some of the questions, especially with research around the ruling family, we had to kill the research. Like we had was almost about to be published. Then we consider that there are ethical challenges that will face us and face our family who remain there, who might face retaliation. So in conclusion, between our autoethnography can serve as a method of resistance that historically marginalized and displaced scholars can use in their own research, and decolonizing academia generally and migration displacement research specifically has been a long struggle and cannot be achieved, of course, by individual research alone. Thank you so much for your listening. I'm looking forward to our next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's like you're doing research on this session almost in the place of MESA Global Academy. I can't wait for the discussion on that. We'll have opportunity to discuss all of the papers at the end. We have 2 more papers, so I'd like to welcome Dr. Mirwais Parsa, who is a research scholar at the Center for, hold on, I have to admit someone to the waiting room. A research scholar at the Center for Governance and Markets at the University of Pittsburgh. He holds a PhD in economics from South Asian University. His research interests include macroeconomics, institutions, and political economy. Dr. Parsa has published in reputable economic journals and served as a lecturer of economics at Dunya University in Kabul, Afghanistan. In addition to his academic experience, Mr. Parsa served as an advisor to the Afghanistan Ministry of Finance, where he drafted the second document of the Afghanistan National Peace and Development Framework, contributed to putting forth a comprehensive cross-sectoral COVID-19 fiscal stimulus and response program, and provided critical support with fiscal space management. Dr. Parsa will be speaking to us about rent-seeking, reform, and special influence groups, insights from modern Afghanistan. Go ahead.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Jessica, for chairing the session, and thanks to Mimi for organizing this important session. I'll go ahead and share my slides. Do you see my slides?
Yep, that looks good.
All right, so the paper is on rent-seeking, reform, and special influence groups. In the paper, I'm basically trying to develop a new theoretical framework for analyzing the process of reform in contexts where there are peculiar interest groups with diverging interests and often hostile and conflicting interests. And then in the second part of the paper, I'm applying the theory in the case of Afghanistan. So the importance of interest groups in basically shaping the outlook of the society, the institutions, the public policy, there is actually a very long literature on it, dating back to 1970s when Stigler for the first time produced this important notion of capture theory, where he argued that he basically challenged the the traditional view on regulation, which basically considered government regulations something on the interest of public welfare. And he argued that regulators, because they are captured by the capitalists, by industries, often what they want to do is not at the best interest of the public, but basically at the best interest of particular groups who lie at the intersection of the control of the industry and the government. Like the best case of this is now the new Trump and Elon friendship, which is basically, you see that how capitalists and industry comes and pushes for the success of a political figure, and then the political figure, of course, uses the government resources to the best interest of the founders. Then Pilsman actually expanded the notion of the theory, which was put forward by Stigler, and he kind of formalized it, and he added the notion that the regulator's decision-making is basically an optimum decision, where he equates the marginal cost and marginal gains of introducing a new regulation. The marginal cost being that when you sort of impose a new regulation on industry loses to a certain extent. But the gain is, of course, when you impose regulation on industries, then the public gains from it. And it's at the best interest of the regulator to basically balance these two costs and benefits and reach at an optimum equilibrium. Then Baker in 1983 also contributed in this line of literature, and he basically argued that, well, the success of groups, different interest groups in shaping the policy to their best interest is related to how large or small is the group and how homogeneous the group is. And of course, the more homogeneous and more small the group is, the more successful they are. This is not what I'm focusing on, this theory of interest group, but it's implicit in my research. What I'm focusing more on is this idea of rent seeking, which is basically the social cost of rent seeking, which comes up as a result of the interaction of different interest groups with conflicting interests. The social cost of rent seeking, there is again a long-standing literature on it, which dates back to early 1950s. And it was first introduced by Kruger, and he said that when there is imperfections in the market, my research is mostly from an economics background. I hope it is interesting to most of colleagues here listening. Basically, when there are monopolies or there are lobbying interest groups or there are regulations, any sort of imperfection in the market that you can think of, they produce rents. And these rents has important social costs, which is often much higher than the benefits that they produce, whether it's regulation or monopolies or whatever. For example, this chart is the case of a monopoly, where if there is a monopoly, what happens in the market, basically, in case there's a competitive market, you have this you are producing at the red point where it is socially efficient. The economy is producing at the level QC at a much lower price PC. And the surplus, which will be this area, purple area, it is basically equally shared between producers and consumers. But in case of monopoly, when a market is monopolized, the monopoly has the power to produce, to lower the production, produce much lower at the QM level, and sell at a much higher price PM. The result of this action is basically the purple area, the deadweight loss, which is caused by monopoly power. And this is borne by the society as a whole, the consumer and the producer, whereas the producer surplus is much higher now, this orange area. The consumer surplus, the green area, is lower than the competitive equilibrium. And therefore, this triangle, which is popularly known as the Harburger triangle of deadweight loss, is the cost to the society of the rent seeking. So Harberger notion was that there is a cost of rent seeking, but it's not that big. It's limited to this specific triangle. And in another paper, somewhere in mid-1950s, he showed that, empirically showed that the cost of rent seeking to the US economy is around 1% of GDP. The subsequent literature, which is basically put forth by Gordon Tullock in his seminal article in 1967, is that the social cost of rent seeking is in fact not limited to that small deadwood loss triangle. It's much bigger. And the reason it is much bigger is because when there is a rent out there in the society, different groups basically go after it. They compete to gain that rent or to influence it in this certain ways that serves their interests. And in this process, actually, these groups, they spend a lot of time and a lot of resources basically to influence or gain the rent. And at the end of the day, because only one of the groups get access to rent, all the resources and all the real time that is spent by n number of groups is basically a cost to the society. And this is much higher than the deadwood loss triangle, and it is over that cost. So what are some limitations of this notion of rent seeking? The one put forward by Kruger and Tullock is that they are mostly focused in the Western economies where there are strong institutions, where the major problems are basically from monopolies, from government regulations, or from lobbying interest groups. But when you take this notion of rent seeking and try to apply it in other contexts, the context of low income and traditional societies, like Afghanistan and much of the Middle East, the theory basically fails to explain the realities of those contexts. And the reason is that in those contexts, as much as the context itself is different, the institutions, which is basically the platforms where different interest groups play their games, those institutions are different, and the type and features of the players are different, and therefore the extent and the nature of rent itself could be different. And therefore, this is what I'm aiming to take up in this paper. And the objective is to sort of extend the existing theory of rent seeking to authoritarian contexts, and in the process, develop a new theoretical framework to explain the rent seeking and influence group dynamics in those contexts, and analyze the impact of group competition or conflicts on rent seeking and long-term institutional development. As I said, the context is basically authoritarian contexts. They are contexts which are very much polycentric. They have different ways of governance, different institutional orders, formal, informal, that are often overlapping. Whereas the formal institutions are generally weak, very unstable. There is a very robust and strong informal institutional order in those countries, and property right is not well defined, and interest groups, basically, they are often having conflicting interests, which are often hostile, and also there are different preferences for the type and composition of public goods in those contexts. Again, in continuation of that, there is no general consensus on the sort of institutions which are out there, and the special influence groups, they actively seek to shape the institutional alignments and the outlook of the society based on their own mental models. And there is this external and internal system of rents, which basically lubricates the relationship between various interest groups. The external rent is what the state gains from external actors from other countries, and internal rent is the system of rent seeking which is flowing between different interest groups internally. And in this context, the play of the game between various interest groups, and therefore the extent of rent that is produced and shared among different interest groups, of course, at the cost of broader society, entails two possible equilibrium. One is a stable one, and the second one is a cyclical one, which I'll explain later on. The stable equilibrium is that the ruling elites, the de jure elites, they concede, they try to compromise with conflicting interest groups. For example, in case of Afghanistan, the traditional authority, which has happened quite a lot over the course of history in Afghanistan. And when various interest groups, they collaborate instead of preferring a conflict scenario, they produce a massive social rent. And in the process, there are multiple winners, the winners being different groups, unlike the Holocaust, where he says that when different interest groups, they commit resources, at the end of the day, only one group wins, and therefore all the others are loser, and also there is a cost to the society. But in this context, basically, the winners are the elites on top, which is a composition of basically your de jure rulers, your de facto rulers, and various other power holders. And the losers are the broader society, the general public. So this coordinated theft, which is a very strong term that I'm using to describe them between of the interest groups, which are de jure and de facto rulers, it basically perpetuates this coalition among the elites, and also in these societies, the fact that there is no income tax, and also a lot of the traditional elites are tax exempt, then who bears the cost of rent seeking, the cost of collaboration and stability of the government, which comes up as a result of the coordinated efforts of different elites, is basically borne by the productive sectors in the economy, by the merchants, by the industries, by manufacturers, and by the general public. So in the Tullock and Harberger notion of the social cost of rent seeking could produce inefficiencies in the short term, but in the long term, basically the economy gets back to its stable equilibrium, and there's not much of a cost to the society. But here, the impact is not a short-term impact. Well, there is a short-term impact as well, but the real impact of rent seeking among this set of actors and this specific context that I'm studying is that it produces a very long-lasting effect through two channels, through its impact on institutional change, and also its impact on long-term economic development. The fact that the interest groups and the coalition of the elites are kept stable as a result of the huge taxes imposed on productive sectors, it's basically erodes incentive of those economic agents to produce, and therefore it leads to less capital accumulation over time and a low-level equilibrium of the economy. And it produces a vicious cycle where rents and lack of inclusive economic growth increases the power of predatory actors and suppresses the productive sectors of the economy. And there is, of course, a two-way relationship between the two, one feeding the other. And then
Excuse me, Dr. Parsa, I just wanted to let you know that you're almost out of time, and I see you have a lot more slides left, so maybe you want to...
Okay, I'll go quicker. So the cyclical equilibrium is basically on and off stability of the economy and the polity in general. When different groups, they coordinate, basically there is stability, and when there's a conflict, one of the groups violates the terms of implicit agreement among different actors, then that agreement is breached, and therefore the stability is over. And various power groups, they try to find their own sort of ruler who compromises with them and then install them as the de jure ruler. And therefore, in the process, you see that there is stability, and then there is instability, and then the cycle continues itself. And the major outcome of this is that there is room for an institutional change in the long term. But of course, the fact that de jure rulers and reformers have to compromise with different interest groups, the process of the reform is very slow. In the case of Afghanistan, very quickly, I distinguish between three interest groups. One is the de jure rulers, and the second de facto authorities, and the third one is the emerging political parties. Of course, the de jure rulers, from establishment of the modern Afghanistan in 1880 to current day, they have basically ruled through exclusive institutions. Property rights were not well defined, and well protected across the course of history in Afghanistan. And these de jure rulers and institutions were very loosely tied with the society in a one-way extractive relationship, because they were extracting a lot of resources from communities. In return, there was much less public goods, almost no public goods offered to rural communities in particular. And ruling elites, they consistently, therefore, depended on external rent. They got the external rent and also rent from the sale of natural resources, and they funded that peculiar system of internal rent seeking, which was necessary for keeping the political stability. Traditional authority, unlike the de jure rulers, they are very much comprehensively distributed across the society in Afghanistan. As Adel was describing in the case of Syria, I believe, the same is true in the case of Afghanistan, where you have different interest groups like Khans, Maliks, and clergies, and also they are driving their legitimacy from the informal institutions, the Sharia law, the culture, the tribal codes of behavior, and the fact that they are close to the people, and also they are providing certain public goods to the people. There's a lot of trust placed on them, and this puts them in a higher advantage to seek rent from the de jure rulers in return for recognizing the de jure rulers. And emerging political parties, a new experience in Afghanistan, basically started from 20s, and then there was a period of regression, and then it got back to the scene sometime in 1950s. And therefore, after 1950s, you see the modern political parties that dominate the political spectrum in Afghanistan. And
can you conclude in like one?
This is, I believe, the last one.
Okay, great.
This is how I situate different interest groups, where the traditional authorities are basically, they are anti-reform. They are leading the informal institutions, the masses. They are isolationist. They don't want to deal with the center. They don't want the center to interfere in the community affairs. Then on the other end of the spectrum, you have some of the reformers, the de jure rulers, who are pro-reform, and the pro-reformers, the political parties. And then in the middle ground, you have the de jure rulers, the dictators, who are trying to balance sort of between the two groups. And they are, if you read the history of Afghanistan, they have been leaning towards more reform. To conclude, well, the conflict of interest among different groups, it basically not only drives the short-term economic development, but also determines the longer-term institutional outlook of the society, and how the institutions, what shape and type they take, and how they change. And in the absence of agreed rules of the game, which is basically institutions, then there's this peculiar system of rent-seeking, which emerges as a dominant factor to sustain coalition of various interest groups. And while rent-seeking leads to short-term equilibrium, stability in the economy and polity, but it leads to a very long-term cost to the society in the form of extractive institutions and erosion of the incentive of the productive sectors of the economy to accumulate capital, and therefore long-term economic regression. So I stop here, and thank you.
Thank you so much. I don't want to say that this is the future in the US, but already seeing elements of actually what you're talking about. So that's concerning for Afghanistan and for the United States. Our last presenter is Hamid Isar. Hamid is a visiting research scholar at the University of Arizona in the James E. Rogers College of Law. He has an LLM from the University of Washington School of Law. and is the former dean and assistant professor at Jowzjan University School of Law and Political Sciences in Afghanistan. He will be presenting a paper called Balancing Tradition and Inclusion, Framework Principles for an Afghan Accord. Please welcome Hamid.
Thank you very much. And I'm very happy to be here today to present my paper. Unfortunately, like other friends, I haven't have a slide, but we can talk a little bit if it's fine. So thank you for introducing me and sharing this session. It's a very honor for me to be here to discuss the paper you just mentioned, Balancing Tradition and Inclusion, a framework principles for an Afghan Accord. So it's a little different than other friends. It's more related to the law. So I just want to give like a general idea that it's a proposal framework for Afghanistan regarding to the current situation in Afghanistan. So my talk will have 4 parts. First, I will begin by discussing the current situation under the Taliban in Afghanistan, in particular, that the current government or structure efforts to govern the country without a written constitution. And then, secondly, I will discuss the price of this lawlessness situation for not only for the country, but also for the people. And I will answer this question: what would be the incentives for the Taliban or for the regime to embrace a constitution or adopted a legal framework? Thirdly, I will briefly outline my proposal framework and see how we can have both inclusion and the Islamic tradition with inclusion for women and minorities and other people in Afghanistan. Fourthly, if there is time, I will anticipate and respond to objection for both conservatives and reformists. So there would be some objections from both sides. So I will discuss that one. So let me start with the first part, the current situation under the Taliban. As you might know that the Taliban first emerged as an armed group in 1994 founded by Pashtun students trained in Deobandi Madrasa, mostly Pashtuns, in Pakistan, and they govern Afghanistan without constitution for first time during the 1996 to 2001. But after 20 years, upon regaining the power in 2021, they fundamentally changed the system that was involved in during the last 20 years or 2 decades in Afghanistan, and they abolished the 2004 constitution, and not only that constitution, but also the legislative body and any system of check and balances. So the so-called Amir or Amir al-Mu'minin hold absolute power, making unilateral decision in all area of the country. Taliban also profoundly altered the judiciary, unfortunately, and removing experienced judges and appointing their own mullahs and maulawis who make right now legal ruling and according to their rigid interpretation from Islamic sources or fiqh. The other thing is that they did regarding to the system is the legislative duties also has been delegated to the government ministries, especially the Ministry of Justice, and now the Amir is with degrees they issued the rules, or their degrees is like a law. And the Taliban currently unwilling to govern with a constitution, and partly this due to uncertainty about the sustainability of its desired government. That's the one reason, obviously, that they are not able, or they are not want to have a constitution for the government. And the other reason is that they are have a fundamentalist belief in the adequacy of the devil laws, that they believe that's everything and we have everything in that laws. And the lack of a formal legal code has enabled them to violate the basic rights, as you might hear from news that there is a lot of restriction, especially for women and girls, and freedoms. So this also undermined the regime's legitimacy, and none of the no countries yet recognize them as a state. So why the Taliban should embrace a rule of law or adopt a constitution? What would be the incentives for the Taliban, another actor, to embrace a written constitution? By embracing a written constitution, they might limiting actually their government's power and establishing rule of law and separation of power that consider to limiting the Amir and limiting the authorities. It might seem that the Taliban has no incentives to adopt a written constitution, but in fact, the current lawlessness situation, as I mentioned before, has a substantial cost for the Taliban as well. It has cost for the people of Afghanistan. Like we left the country and we lost everything and we started over from zero. But it has a lot of cost for the Taliban. Establishing a codified legal system have a lot of key benefits even for the Taliban. So let me say some of them very shortly, like gaining domestic and international legitimacy is one of those benefits for the Taliban. So the Taliban desire for legitimacy and recognition, despite the resistance to reform like women's rights, and highlight the cost of continued illegitimacy. That's so they are talking in many conferences and meetings with other countries and asking for recognizing their government as a state, but they are not flexible and accepting other ideas. So if they embrace rule of law and adopt a constitution, that might help them and their government to recognize. The other important incentives for the Taliban is attracting foreign investment and aid. So with over 90% of the population impoverished, establishing security infrastructure and sound economic policies is crucial for sustainable growth. That's very important things for the Taliban government, because they are looking for international aid and support, and always ask that, even though a lot of countries, including of United States right now, supporting the Taliban, supporting under the hate, financially, they are sending billions of dollars during the last year, but by having a good government system and adopting a constitution, they might attract foreign investment more and international aid. The third incentives would be reducing public discontent and violent opposition. So the Taliban currently faces growing public discontents over policies seen as ideological, oppressive, and are disconnected from the needs of the Afghan people. So when they have the law and they acted according to the law and rule of law would be there, so a lot of people would be follow the rules. But right now, many young people and others who have opportunity, they try to leave the country. So this might be help as well. So what should we do? The purpose framework for reform is we consider that any new constitution for Afghanistan would need to satisfy certain basic requirements to be acceptable to powerful forces in the country. So as before Dr. Adel said about the Yemen situation, and there is a lot of tribes, it's actually very similar to Afghanistan. So there is a lot of forces in the ground and a lot of people, even though they are living right now the country, but they have their supporter inside Afghanistan. So any constitution, the constitution should be acceptable for all these forces and all these people, including the Taliban, while addressing its very current problem. According to my paper and my idea, the first and foremost important thing is a constitution would need to protect citizen rights and freedom. That's very important for the current situation, and it should be considered to have a constitution that protect the right of the people, especially the women and girls right now. The second, a constitution would need to establish a well-structured government with check and balance. So right now, the so-called Amir al-Mu'minin has the ultimate power and nobody can have any check on him. So there should be they should be accountable for what they are doing. At least for right now, I suggested to adopting models like Iran to suit Afghanistan, even though the Iran situation is maybe not acceptable for Iranian people. But regarding to Afghanistan situation, I suggest at least we consider that situation. Like we have the Amir right now, they have the Rahbar, and we can see the constitution and have something to suit for Afghan's context. Third, a constitution should establish formal equality and prohibit discrimination. That's another big issue in Afghanistan right now under the Taliban, and creating equal opportunity for all citizens regardless of ethnicity, religion, language, gender, and geography is very essential to establish stability and quitting opposition to the regime in non-Pashtun region of the country. That's also very important. And proposed constitution should be a new constitution should also establish the rule of law and an independent judiciary system, especially considering a clear and a specific Tazi rules, similarly to the previous Afghan criminal code in Afghanistan. So, but they are following the Hanafi fiqh right now, but there is not a code for, especially for criminals, and we should consider that. And the other issues that we had during the last 20 2 decades was a decentralization. So the constitution should also decentralize some power to provincial governments to address over-centralization issue, improving local administration effectiveness. So that's important. And the other principle, the proposed constitution should be considered and consider it be and approved, is that the constitution should be approved by the traditional Afghan assembly, or we call Loya Jirga, to ensure the constitution reflects Afghan social values, because the Taliban was excluded from the drafting the 2004 constitution was one mistake, and that should be considered, and there not be any gap. And the other is the focus should be to regulate. That's I think the very important thing, is because we have experience. We had 8 constitutions during the 100 years since 1923, but always we have exclusion. We have exclude some groups, like as I told you, during the drafting of 2004 constitution, Taliban was excluded. So and always we try to collapse the government and establish a new government with new law and stuff like that. So the focus should be regulate the power of the current regime rather than removing them and addressing the Taliban's concern about the erosion of Islamic principle while protecting human rights and check arbitrary government's power. That's, I think, very crucial things. I know most of the people not agree with this kind of suggestion, but the current situation, there is no other alternative for the Taliban currently, and people really suffering from the situation. So it's not a perfect framework, but it is something that we need, because Taliban ruling the country since 2021, and still they are over there, and there is nothing changed yet. So I don't know if I have time.
You are a little over. You can have another minute if you'd like, just so we have time for everyone to talk.
Okay, sure. So for anticipating and responding to objection, there is, as I told you before, there is conservatives objections, and there would be reformists. So for conservatives, limiting the Amir's power would be one of the objections. They said, okay, by proposing this kind of constitution, there is a limitation for the Amir's power, which is against the Islamic rule. And the other concern is over undermining core Islamic values is another issue that might be raised up. Excessive compromise in applying Sharia law, and accusation of appeasing Western influence that they raised before during the 2004 constitution was another issue of concern regarding to that. For reformists, there might be like completely or near the opposite objections, empowering a totalitarian Taliban's government, risk of regressive policies under religion law, and excessive influence of conservative clerks, and inadequate protection for rights and freedom might be objections, and there might be a lot. So to end this talk, the bottom line is that condition in Afghanistan, as I explained before, are very difficult and unstable, and the people are really suffering. Given the strength of the Taliban right now, no perfect or ideal solution is possible, but there are a strong reason for many interests to support pragmatic constitutional reform that balancing Islamic tradition with inclusion, separation of power, and the rule of law. The important thing is that finding a workable path is crucial, however imperfect. So So that's the main reason of my proposal, that right now people are suffering and we need to have something. As we know in US, people say it, something is better of nothing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We have, sorry, I tried to maintain as much time for discussion. We have about 18 minutes for discussion. So I know that Begum has something in the chat. A lot of you might have questions. I would like to start with one question, picking up on something that you said, Hamid, and that's about the price of excluding. Like, what would be the price of excluding the Taliban in future plans for Afghanistan? And I wanted to ask the same question of Adel and Mirwais, because you both provide like high-level plans for diagnoses of the problem and high-level plans for how it could be fixed. What would be the who would be excluded, if anyone, or any constituency from the plans, whether it's tribal mediation or dealing with rent seeking in Afghanistan? Who would be excluded, and what problems might that pose? Either one of you can start.
Okay, I can go ahead. Thank you for the question, Jessica. Well, the history of Afghanistan is very interesting. It's interesting in many sense. One, it has been a country that, in the strict meaning of the term, has never been colonized. So that country has no experience of direct colonization by European powers, and therefore there's a disadvantage to that, the fact that we have not been decolonized, and that disadvantage is that the modern institutions and way of life was not introduced to Afghanistan earlier, unlike many of the neighboring countries. For example, the Indian subcontinent, particularly India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan, now they have a very strong set of institutions, starting from constitution to criminal laws to name it, different sort of institutions that even poses a strict constraint to the power of the president. Now, in the recent history of the Pakistan government, we can see that a lot of the presidents and prime ministers, they have, in the recent history of Pakistan, they have spent many years behind the bars, basically going against the constitution, and the court have had that power to remove the president and put him in the prison. But that sort of a strong institution has never been introduced to Afghanistan by any external power like the colonizer. And the fact that the country was not colonized, therefore what remained is the sort of very domestic institutions, which has a lot of the flavor of Islamic institutions prevalent in many of the Middle Eastern countries, where you basically have somebody coming and claiming divine authority to rule. For example, back in the 1880s and early 1900s, there was this powerful king in Afghanistan who was now in the Western literature who is termed as Iron Emir, and he was the one who subjugated all rival groups and established basically the Westphalian concept of nation state in Afghanistan. He basically came and claimed divine authority, and the entire power and authority was rested in his hands. And then somewhere in mid 1930s, we had certain changes which was leaning towards more traditionalism. And in 1964, there was a decade of constitution, a decade of liberalism in Afghanistan, where the country basically transitioned from a very authoritarian rulership to a constitutional democracy. And in fact, for 10 years period, there was some level of stability and economic development and political development. Though there was a limitation imposed by the king as well. But then there was this change. Suddenly, after 1964, again, the country went back to its earlier trajectory of the rule of traditional authority being much stronger and much prevalent over the political affairs of the state. And therefore, it is very hard to neglect the traditional authority in Afghanistan, the countryside in Afghanistan. For example, that the Taliban that Hamid explained about, they are basically forces from rural Afghanistan. They came and ruled the country for 5 years in the late 90s, and they have gained the power again in 2001. And this is what makes Afghanistan very unstable, is that there is no general consensus on the rules of the game. The sort of institutions that should rule the country, nobody agrees with that. The institutions that were put forth in the 1964 Constitution, it was basically a wish list of the ruling family. And that same constitution was adopted back in 2001 during the Bonn process, which led to the establishment of the Republic of Afghanistan that's ruled for the past 20 years, with no changes in the constitution in terms of making it more exclusive, in terms of decentralizing power, and therefore it failed us again with the collapse of the Republic in 2001. So, and again, during the 20 years of the Republic government, when the international community, they wanted to put forward a strong institution, they tried to sort of empower women, try to bring more inclusivity in the government and in political affairs of the state. But unfortunately, they had that same mentality of a very centralized power. A strong executive would be necessary in Afghanistan to rule the country, which is not the case. Afghanistan has been historically a decentralized nation. It has historically self-governed itself. And when you try to make the rulership of the state very centralized, it basically doesn't work in that context. And this is what international community supports in Afghanistan. What could have been an alternative is that the informal institutions were sort of formalized instead of reinventing the wheel and putting forth new institutions in the context. For example, there was, when I was working at the Ministry of Finance, there was this very popular program which had delivered a lot economically, the Rural Development Program. It was supported by the World Bank and a lot of donor community, and it was successful. It was delivering a lot of good infrastructure at the village level across Afghanistan. And in fact, it was one of the most successful programs that were implemented back during the Republic. That program, instead of going to the community elders, the jirgas, the councils, which are already there and they have been there for centuries in Afghanistan, they tried to establish new sort of councils to implement those infrastructure, appoint new people, neglect the traditional authority. And therefore, what happened with it, when the program finished, the council, the institution, the sort of arrangement that was put forth, it also ended there. And
Yeah, I think
did not get anything out of it.
I wasn't trying to suggest that that traditional or pre-existing institutions shouldn't be brought into or empowered in a certain way. And I think Adel's paper really speaks to that, the importance of existing tribal mediation and also what you have just been saying and Hamid said about the importance of integrating the Jirga or even Taliban parties into a solution. My question was more like, how do you then integrate that into a plan where other elites or political groups, for example, Adel, in the case of like the armed groups, so that there will be legitimacy there? I don't know, Adel, if you had a reaction to that.
Yes, thank you so much. I would like to speak about tribes in Yemen. For example, in 2011, there was a UN special envoy for Yemen, and there was like Gulf initiatives between political parties and the former regime. And in 2013, 2014, there was a Yemeni National Conference dialogue, and all armed groups, political parties participated in at that conference. Unfortunately, they excluded the tribes from that national dialogue conference. And after that, we have seen a lot of international attempts to help Yemenis to solve the conflicts. Unfortunately, we have seen once again, international community looks at Yemen from the lens of regional powers like Saudi Arabia, and now United Arab Emirates and Iran. We have said if you want to help Yemenis, you must look at Yemen from the lens of Yemenis themselves. And of course, majority of Yemeni populations are tribes. Now, because they say that tribes are divided and they are joining armed groups, but we have many tribal leaders who have supported the UN envoy to solve some social problems, like as I said in my presentation. Tribal leaders have solved the exchange of prisoners and social problems, like to open the roads between governorates, to open the siege of Taiz, and also to help the local authorities to save societies and secure some tribal areas. So it is very, very important today. And I suggested that we have to appoint like tribal leaders in the office of UN Special Envoy for Yemen. And these could recommend and could give some kind of suggestions because they understand the mentality and the behaviors of these armed groups better than others. No one knows our culture better than us. But unfortunately, right now, for example, if you ask the UN Special Envoy for Yemen office, what do you think about future of conflict in Yemen? And they say, we don't know. Okay, if you don't know, you are just trying to get some suggestions from regional powers. These regional powers are trying just to help or to save their national interest. They don't take care of Yemenis or of the Yemeni issues. So I think that, as always, I mentioned that if we want to help Yemenis, we must listen to these groups, social groups, including marginalized groups like Muhammadin, like tribes, like youths, like women, and then all these social groups can participate to achieve a lasting peace. Without listening to the social groups, we cannot address the roots of the problems in Yemen. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I took up all the time with my questions. Do any of you have questions for Begum or Basileus? I could talk, I have a lot, but Begum, did you get your question answered? I saw you put a question in the chat.
Not yet. I actually it doesn't it is not very academic. It might seem irrelevant. I did my question. Basileus mentioned some personal experiences, so I got curious about this his story.
Yeah, I was trying to respond to the question, then it disappeared, so I didn't finish the end of it.
Maybe
If you
could-
read it, you can still answer. It's very welcome to hear your answer.
maybe you could I suggest that you email Begum after and we allow
Yeah,
questions
so
about your
I
presentation?
will talk in general for the benefit of general understanding. So not all scholars from the Middle East are treated equally in terms of sanctions, to put it this way. So if you are from Syria and Iran in particular, you will be facing the most restricted sanctions from OFAC. Turkey and Afghanistan, against the grain, don't have this comprehensive sanctions. For instance, you can wire money to Turkey and Afghanistan and from Turkey and Afghanistan to the United States without any issues. But if you are from 4 or 5 countries, like in the region, that's not the case. There is a difference also between entities and also individuals and also countries. So in your regarding your particular questions, it's less likely you will face any of these challenges. So just to put it this way, if you are from other countries like Syria, Yemen, etc., you are more likely to face these obstacles on daily basis. Regarding a question about permanent residence, this is really contingent on securing a job with. This is beyond the discussion and follow a different path. For instance, let's say you got hired by a university, therefore, or a think tank. They will process your documents. They will have a lawyer, so you are completely in different path. They will issue exemptions if there are any restriction or something else. But in general, my analysis was regarding specifically scholars from targeted countries and the obstacles they face on daily basis. So you cannot generalize and say like that will apply to everyone in the Middle East.
Yeah, and it's I feel like the threats to Turkish scholars are coming from the Turkish
From the
government
government, yeah.
more than
It's coming from the
as you rightly highlighted, Begum. We only have a couple minutes left, and so many of you offered solutions to the problems that you raised. But I wanted to ask Basileus and Begum what their proposed solutions would be. For example, Begum, what should academics keep up the protests, international solidarity? What could be the solution to parachuting? And Basileus, how can those of us, for example, in the academy in the West, we create these things like MESA Global Academy, but that doesn't address all of the structural challenges that you raised. So do you have any suggestions? And now you both have a minute and a half to both answer that question. We can stay over. I don't know if they'll cut us off though, so.
Okay, I will speak 1 minute for 1 minute because it's 2028, 28 past 21 here. Sorry, we have only 2 minutes. I wasted my time. Sorry, by the way. So yes, I agree with you. The scholars should continue the solidarity movement, both in Turkey and also abroad. But I think, unfortunately, such kind of movements are not very pressing for Turkish governments. I think what is really needed is paradigmatic changes in policies. So I think a brand new legal regulation should be adopted in order to prevent the negative impacts of parachuting. For example, one person, only the president appointing the rectors is really pathological. So this should be changed at first place. Thank you so much.
So regarding my 2 cents, I'm very pessimist. I mean, I'm following American politics and it's draconian outreach. So there is over-compliance when it comes, for instance, for source sanctions or conducting a field work. And through now I'm working on a project about diasporic work on development. And I found like even NGOs like from Canada or from Europe working in the region, basically they are facing also consequences which we call overcompliance. And I would highly recommend, like I will post a link to my article, but I would highly recommend reading the book by none other than Jessica and Lara Deeb, which is Anthropology's Politics. It's from 2016 or 2017, but it speaks to challenges that scholars, regardless, like just forget for a second it's about ethnographers or anthropologists, because I can comfortably say generalize that beyond the field, and you would see it's unfortunately it's still relevant. So and it's becoming even more severe and worse, and expecting 4 years of lawsuits against the Trump administration, and also challenges in terms of MESA fund, holding conferences, securing visa to attend a conference, and many others. Like we are speaking from previous experience, but now they are more prepared, and unfortunately, like protesting would be criminalized as well. So I'm not optimistic. So I wish I have 2 cents to contribute other than continue writing, publishing, exposing these draconian, and also call it what as is, a McCarthy, new McCarthy era and a rise of fascism in the United States.
Well, on that note, I do appreciate, even though it seemed like all of you presented really different cases and different papers, I appreciated how they all dealt with very serious structural issues that are historically constituted in the different locations. And I appreciated that the United States and Turkey, as sort of thought of as maybe Europe, maybe Middle East, were included in this discussion. So I hope that you enjoyed this. Thank you so much for your papers, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you for your time, Jessica, and thank you to my colleague
you all.
for
Thank you
continue to
all. Bye.
produce your important work. Thank you.
Yes, please.
Thank you very much, Jessica.
Hopefully
Thank you very
people
much.
listen to you all.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.